It was supposed to be a straightforward segment. Karoline Leavitt had done this kind of televised debate more times than she could count. She'd gone head-to-head with pundits and politicians alike, defending conservative positions and holding her ground with calm precision. But that particular night on national television, something was different. She could feel it before the cameras even rolled. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had taken her seat across from Leavitt with a kind of smug certainty, the kind that suggests a plan already in motion. Karoline noticed it but brushed it off. She had done her homework, had her talking points in order, and was prepared to respond to the usual attacks against former President Donald Trump. She knew they'd bring up January 6th, his court appearances, maybe even the latest polling numbers. She was ready for all of it. But what she wasn't ready for, what no one on her team had prepared her for, was what Crockett pulled out just 15 minutes into the broadcast. The conversation had started predictably enough. Leavitt was making the case that despite media narratives, Trump remained strong among voters. She cited job growth under his administration, energy independence, and a growing dissatisfaction with Biden's leadership. Crockett countered with accusations of chaos, division, and legal baggage. Then, as Karoline took a breath to respond, Crockett leaned forward, almost casually, and dropped a bomb. You're out here defending a man who isn't even being honest with his supporters about his own health, Crockett said, her voice calm, measured. Let's stop pretending everything's fine just because he says it is. There was a second, maybe two, of stunned silence. The host didn't interject. The control room, according to a staffer later quoted anonymously, went dead quiet. Karoline blinked and straightened in her chair. What are you talking about? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Crockett pulled a folded paper from her blazer and held it up just enough to catch the camera's eye, though not enough to read any details. A source close to his campaign leaked this to us, she said. It outlines concerns from his own inner circle about neurological health issues, confusion, short-term memory lapses. Are you seriously going to tell me the American people don't deserve to know about that? It was an ambush. Pure and simple. Whether the document was legitimate or not didn't even seem to matter in that moment. Crockett had timed it perfectly, right? When the audience was engaged, right when Karoline was at her most confident, she knew the accusation alone, on live television, would carry more weight than any policy argument Leavitt could offer in return. Karoline tried to keep her composure. She asked for a source, a date, a signature, anything that would prove the document was real. But Crockett didn't give her one. She didn't need to. The seed had already been planted, and the viewers at home were already reacting. On social media, clips of the moment were being shared within minutes. The hashtag Trump Health Cover-Up began trending on X, formerly Twitter. Influential liberal commentators called it a turning point, while conservative voices scrambled to do damage control. The host, caught between journalistic responsibility and ratings gold, allowed the moment to hang for far longer than usual before finally breaking in to steer the conversation away. Karoline wasn't just surprised. She was cornered. The accusation wasn't about policy or even politics. It was deeply personal. She had worked closely with Trump's campaign and communications team. She had stood on stages across the country defending his fitness for office. Now in front of a national audience, her opponent was suggesting that she had either been lying or was herself being deceived. Crockett didn't shout. She didn't throw a tantrum. That's what made it all the more effective. Her demeanor said, "I know something you don't." And that unnerved Karoline more than any attack line ever had. The most frustrating part for Karoline, and likely the most deliberate, move by Crockett was that the accusation was delivered without evidence that could be immediately scrutinized. There was no way to verify or debunk it in real time. It wasn't a debate, it was a trap. And for the first time in recent memory, Karoline Leavitt was in it. Karoline Leavitt had always been known for her control. Whether she was in front of a hostile crowd or under pressure on live television, she carried herself with the kind of unwavering clarity that made her a rising star among conservatives. Her tone was always measured, her words chosen with precision, and she rarely allowed her opponents to get under her skin. But during that live segment, something shifted subtly at first, then unmistakably. When the allegation about Trump's health was suddenly introduced, the reaction from Karoline wasn't one of overt outrage or immediate deflection. It wasn't a firestorm of yelling or talking over the host. It was something more telling, a moment of hesitation, a blink, a pause that lasted just long enough to signal that she hadn't expected it and didn't yet know how to respond. In political debates, milliseconds matter, and her brief silence was louder than any argument she could have made. Her usual rhythm was disrupted. In the seconds that followed the allegation, she tried to refocus, to pivot back to her prepared talking points. She spoke of how these kinds of attacks were part of a broader pattern, how Democrats had a habit of using innuendo and unverified leaks to manipulate the public discourse. But there was a tremor in her voice that hadn't been there before, a sharpness that sounded less like conviction and more like pressure. Asterisk, as the exchange continued, she began to repeat herself, phrases she had already used earlier in the segment, now resurfacing as filler while she searched for a foothold. She asked for proof, demanded sources, called the accusation a political hit job. Yet the more she pressed, the more it became apparent that she was no longer in control of the moment. The conversation had shifted, and she was reacting rather than leading. Asterisk, her body language told its own story. She leaned forward more than usual, her hands gripping the edges of the table. Her shoulders, typically relaxed in these settings, were tight, and her eyes darted not with panic, but with the visible tension of someone trying to stay composed while recalculating in real time. The control room camera caught it in fleeting shots. The slight furrow of her brow, the way her lips tightened after every answer, the forced smile she gave at one point to brush off a snide remark. Asterisk, even her tone changed. What had started as confident and assertive now carried an edge of exasperation. Her voice rose slightly, not enough to seem unhinged, but enough to betray frustration. It was the sound of someone who knew they were walking into a narrative not of their own making, and who couldn't quite steer it back. Asterisk, and it wasn't just about what was being said, it was about what wasn't. The accusation didn't need to be proven in the moment, it only needed to hang in the air long enough to cast a shadow over her message, and it worked. Karoline, usually the one to throw opponents off their game, found herself having to defend not just a political figure, but her own credibility in defending him. It was an awkward position, and she felt it. Asterisk, what made it more difficult was that she understood the optics. To dismiss the accusation too quickly would make it seem like she wasn't taking it seriously, but to engage with it at length risked legitimizing it, giving it air and traction it didn't deserve. She tried to walk that line, but the result was visible strain. Asterisk, for viewers at home who had watched Karoline with admiration for her poise in the past, this was something different. Not a meltdown, not a breakdown, but a rare crack in the armor. It wasn't dramatic or explosive, but it was real. The mask of composure slipped, just slightly, and for seasoned political observers, that slippage spoke volumes. Asterisk, she didn't lose her temper, she didn't shout or storm out, but she did lose her edge. The way she responded, the way she repeated herself, the way she leaned forward in agitation, it wasn't the Karoline Leavitt her supporters were used to seeing. She was still there, still trying to regain control, but the shift in tone and presence was unmistakable. Asterisk, the document at the center of the controversy never made it onto the screen in full. Crockett waved it briefly, just enough to capture the camera's attention, but not enough for viewers to see its contents. She claimed it was a leaked internal report from within Trump's own circle, one that raised concerns about his cognitive health. She said it referenced incidents of forgetfulness, repeated phrases, and confusion during closed-door meetings. But despite the seriousness of the accusation, the document itself was never verified. No source was named, no date was given, and no one outside that studio had seen it. Asterisk, and yet, the impact was immediate. Asterisk, the moment Crockett introduced the paper, the dynamic of the conversation changed. It didn't matter whether the claims were true. In politics, perception often outpaces reality, and Crockett understood that perfectly. She didn't need the document to be authenticated in real time. She just needed the idea of it to exist, just credible enough to stir out, just vague enough to avoid direct legal or journalistic consequences. Asterisk, Karoline Leavitt recognized this tactic. As a communications strategist and media veteran, she understood how powerful an unsubstantiated claim could be when deployed at the right moment. It wasn't about facts. It was about creating a moment, a seed of uncertainty that would germinate on social media and in the minds of undecided viewers. By the time anyone fact-checked the claim, the headline would already be trending, the clips already circulating, and the damage already done. Asterisk, Crockett didn't read from the document. She didn't even explain its contents in detail. Instead, she hinted using phrases like serious concerns and inside sources, suggesting that even Trump's own allies were privately questioning his capacity to serve. It was suggestive rather than declarative, careful enough to skirt direct accountability, while still leaving the impression that something had been revealed. Asterisk, Karoline demanded to see the full report. She asked for a source, a name, anything that would support the accusation, but Crockett remained evasive. She simply reiterated that the information had come from reliable campaign insiders. It was a political sleight of hand assert, the existence of a damning document without offering any path to confirm or deny it in the moment. Leavitt knew the trap, but by the time she stepped into it, it was too late. Asterisk, the producers didn't help. Despite the gravity of the allegation, the host didn't interrupt to demand verification. There was no pause for context, no disclaimer that the document hadn't been vetted. It was live television, and the sensational moment was allowed to hang unchallenged. The network's responsibility to balance journalistic integrity with viewership clearly tilted towards spectacle. Asterisk, the fallout was immediate. Online political commentators jumped on the clip. Liberal figures claimed the leak validated long-standing suspicions about Trump's age and fitness. Conservative outlets scrambled to discredit the moment, pointing out the lack of evidence. But none of it could undo the fact that millions had watched Karoline, a trusted surrogate of Trump, struggle to answer an accusation that couldn't be properly confronted on air. Trump himself had dealt with rumors about his health before. He'd brushed them off, often mocking his opponents in return, projecting strength and stamina. But this was different. It didn't come from the usual media channels. It was framed as coming from within, from people close to him, from voices that should be loyal. That framing was intentional. It wasn't just an attack on his physical condition, but on the trustworthiness of his inner circle. Karoline had to face that live. The suggestion wasn't just that Trump was hiding something from the public, it was that people like her, who had vouched for him, might have been kept in the dark too. It made her defenses seem less authoritative. She wasn't speaking as someone who had all the facts. She was speaking as someone reacting to something unknown. The brilliance of Crockett's tactic lay in the document's vagueness. It couldn't be authenticated, but it also couldn't be disproven in the moment, and that's all it took. The document's legitimacy didn't matter. It was never about proving a fact, it was about shaping a narrative. And that night, Crockett succeeded in doing just that, with a few calculated words and a folded sheet of paper. What unfolded during the live broadcast wasn't just a clash between political ideologies, or two media-trained professionals. It was a carefully timed example of how modern media can shift the narrative before the facts ever catch up. The moment Jasmine Crockett introduced that folded document and made her vague but piercing accusation about Donald Trump's health, the tone of the segment changed dramatically, and the timing of it all was no accident. In today's media landscape, live television remains one of the few spaces where there is no script, no time to edit or reframe, and no opportunity to walk back a misstep before the public sees it. That unpredictability is what makes it so powerful and dangerous. Crockett understood this better than most. She waited patiently through Karoline Leavitt's well-prepared remarks, allowing her to build confidence in front of the audience. Then, right when the discussion reached a moment of peak focus, she made her move. The technique wasn't new, but its precision was notable. She didn't open the show with the allegation. That would have given Leavitt time to adjust, regroup, or prepare a defense. Instead, Crockett waited until the audience was fully engaged and the host had settled into a rhythm, then struck with the accusation set in bold, and without forewarning. The timing was strategic, not spontaneous. Karoline, to her credit, I immediately recognized what was happening. She didn't flinch in the theatrical sense. There was no outburst or on-air meltdown. But she did lose the rhythm she had established. The accusation wasn't just designed to challenge Trump's reputation, it was designed to knock Karoline off balance, to steal the momentum from her, and shift the audience's attention from substance to scandal. That's how modern media battles are won. It's no longer about the strength of your argument or the clarity of your message. It's about who can create the moment that will live online for the next 24 hours. Crockett's accusation didn't need to be just needed to trend. And it did. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips of the moment flooded platforms like X and TikTok. People weren't discussing Trump's economic record or policy positions. They were debating whether the document was real, whether reaction meant she knew something, and whether Trump's team was hiding a deeper issue. Crockett, who provided no proof and offered only suggestive language, had already won the public relations battle. The conversation had left the studio and entered the algorithm. That shift marks a fundamental change in how political narratives are shaped. It used to be that scandal required substance. Now, scandal only requires suggestion. And if that suggestion is delivered at the right time, in front of the right audience, it can take on a life of its own. Facts become secondary. Timing is everything. Karoline faced an impossible choice in that moment. If she ignored the claim, it might seem like she was hiding something or caught off guard. If she engaged it too directly, she risked legitimizing it. She attempted a middle path, asking for proof, demanding names, appealing to logic. But by then, logic was no longer in the driver's seat. The audience had already been drawn into a new narrative, and the camera caught Karoline trying to pull it back, a task that, once the seed of doubt is planted, rarely succeeds. The story Crockett told in that brief window didn't need chapters or facts. It was a single insinuation, expertly placed, at a moment when Karoline had no way to respond with clarity or certainty. Trump, whose age and health have been routine subjects of political debate, became the invisible centerpiece of the segment, spoken of but not present, accused but not defended with any first-hand knowledge. His presence loomed larger because of the absence of clarity, and that was by design. The incident was less about policy or truth, and more about understanding how to manipulate a live moment for maximum effect. Crockett didn't need to debate Karoline. She just needed to shift the battlefield, and she did it in seconds. The discussion they had prepared for, the points Karoline was eager to make, all became background noise. One well-timed accusation, one unverified document, and the entire tone of the conversation was rewritten in real time. As the segment drew to a close, the weight of what had transpired lingered in the studio. The debate had started with the usual energy. Karoline Leavitt, confident in her talking points, eager to defend Donald Trump's leadership, and ready to challenge the typical partisan narratives. But by the end, the focus was no longer on the economy, border security, or campaign promises. It was on an accusation, one delivered with surgical precision, timed to derail the momentum and leave the audience questioning what they had just witnessed. What made the moment so striking wasn't just the claim itself, but the ripple effect it caused. Karoline's composure, though still technically intact, was visibly tested. She had faced many tough interviews before, but this was different. She wasn't just confronting a political opponent, she was confronting a tactic, one rooted not in substance, but in disruption. The document, whether real or fabricated, had served its purpose. It shifted the frame. It turned Karoline from a spokesperson into a defender of uncertainty, forced into the unenviable position of proving a negative in real time. And that's the lesson of moments like this in modern media. The game has changed. In the age of social media, where clips are cut and shared before the broadcast is even over, the truth often takes a backseat to impressions. A raised eyebrow, a pause, a shaky answer, these become the story, not the facts. And for someone like Karoline, who built her reputation on confidence and clarity, this kind of live ambush was a calculated test of her resilience. But even in the face of that challenge, Karoline didn't collapse. She didn't walk off, lose control, or resort to personal attacks. She tried, however imperfectly, to bring the conversation back to the issues that matter. That counts for something. In a political environment increasingly shaped by viral moments and sound bites, maintaining focus even while under fire is a rare and underrated strength. As for Crockett, her move was undeniably effective. She didn't win the debate through better arguments. She won it by understanding the moment, by using the ambiguity of a single document to change the subject and draw all eyes to her. It was tactical, opportunistic, and deeply emblematic of today's media strategies. The broader takeaway is that public discourse is no longer just about persuasion, it's about disruption. The most successful political communicators today aren't necessarily the most honest or well-prepared, but the most adept at stealing the spotlight. Whether that's good for democracy is another question entirely. In the end, both women walked off that set knowing something had shifted. For Karoline Leavitt, it was a reminder that even the most seasoned voices can be thrown off course by a single, well-placed strike. For viewers, it was a glimpse into the high-stakes theater of modern political media, where timing, not truth, often determines